everyone.
Good afternoon.
And, thank you for coming. This presentation is a result of a conversation that Archbishop Pat had with a number of people. He came to a clergy life and ministry meeting at the beginning of the year. And during that time, we talked about how the CLAM team, Clergy Life and Ministry, is trying to offer various topics around formation. So we were simply outlining what we've been asked to do by you in different forums. And as we were reviewing that, he made the suggestion that the review of the Vatican II documents would be quite timely. And so obviously we're not reviewing all of that Vatican II documents, but at least the four great constitutions. And we wanted to do this in an accessible way. So hence we were looking at organizing this fairly quickly within the year and looking at the resources or the expertise that's already within the diocese. So hence, you'll notice our presenters are mostly local. And the other goal was to make sure that we offered this in person, but we included a live stream component, which we have a few people online, and we will record the session as well. So we'll offer that later after the presentation. This year, we're hoping to have two presentations because of the number of months left for us. It's just too difficult to try to compress everything. And so probably in a year's time, we'll offer two more sessions, mindful that the first part of next year will be dominated by the diocesan synod. And so once that has completed, then we'll offer the other two documents that we haven't. So today we're privileged to hear from Father James McEvoy, who many of you know, but some of you will not know. James is a senior lecturer with ACU. ACU, Australian Catholic University, has an office, not a campus, but an office here. And James and Michael Traynor and Joe Laffin, I think they're the main three, yep, are based here, and they do various things. I think Michael was saying earlier that this morning he could teach in person at probably at St. Barnabas College, the Anglican Theological College. And this afternoon he can teach by Zoom various Catholic students through ACU around the country. So you can see how these days things are changed in the way we deliver. So we're grateful today for James. James has a background in this topic. I'm sure he'll draw attention to that. And so we welcome James for his presentation.
Thanks very much, Tim. Lovely to be invited and lovely to be here with you. I think really important that we have these series of 4 events focusing on the major constitutions of the Second Vatican Council, because the Council itself is the most authoritative body of teaching in the Roman Catholic Church since the 16th century, since Trent. So fundamental to the way that Catholics understand themselves, hence these 4 constitutions. We can't cover all the documents, but we can cover the major constitutions. And good to begin with this document, although it was the very last document promulgated at the Second Vatican Council on the 7th of December 1965. It really is one of, I think, firstly, the most insightful documents of the Council, and the most, well, revolutionary sense is a word, but the document that was most important, I think, for our faith in the 20th and into the 21st century. So I want to show you the major shift in self-understanding that happened there. It is the longest document promulgated by a council ever in the history of our tradition. So it's far more than we can cope with in, well, about 45 minutes. My plan is to try and set out a picture in about 45 minutes and to have dialogue, then questions afterwards, of course, but I mean, feel free to jump in or, yeah, respond with your, well, questions or insights. Great. So that's the plan. And so this is the image that I chose to represent what we're doing here today. This is Germany. This is Cologne, Köln, as they say there. The cathedral was built, or it began to be built in the 13th century, beautifully lit there, and a gorgeous image, a gorgeous photograph. But I guess what the image shows you is an ancient faith, or it's a building, clearly, but an ancient faith in a modern world. And that's what the document does, and wants to show us the fullness of faith in this time. How do we make that connection? That's the question that the Fathers of the Council set up and raised. Well, that's not going to be up. Oh. No, you're good, you're good. No problem. You're good. Right, so that's the picture, and I want to set it up thinking about what I hope to set up, to give you is just a frame to think about pastoral life today. I think that's what the document does. That's what Gaudium et Spes does. It gives us a way of understanding it, of, well, evangelizing or proclaiming the faith in the present day. We don't live in the 1st century. We don't live in the 16th century. When now it's a different world, and faith has a different place now, or as Charles Taylor, whom I want to talk about in a moment, says, the conditions of belief have changed. We don't believe we have the same faith as the 1st century, the 16th century, but there are different resonances now. We believe in a different way now. So that's what I want to set up for you in this time. So this is the plan. There's the plan. There we go. This is Ravenna. Pretty pictures, that's all it's there for. So just want to speak briefly about the cultural context of faith today, and then tell you a bit of the story, number 2, of the redaction history of the Pastoral Constitution, or the history of the editing of the document, the way it arose, and the self-understanding that the fathers moved through in that 3 years, and then finish finally with a picture even of the church in the world that Gaudium et Spes puts out there, and then see where we go after that. Well, that'll be our 45 minutes anyway. And yeah, so that's where we are. So how to tell the story of the cultural context of faith today, or as the way I put it a moment ago, the place of faith, or what Taylor calls the conditions of belief. One of the ways of telling this story, and the way that's been the most significant, the loudest, let's just say that, since 1960s, has been this whole secularization thesis. It's a whole, well, most of the major sociologists of the time from the 60s and really until 1995 understood the shifting place of religion in terms of what's called the secularization thesis. So that with the increase of modernity, you know, with the development of modern economy, with the development of science and technology, history, all of those things that shift self-understandings that shifted through that period, that religion would decline and eventually peter out. That's the picture. Is that us? No, sorry, some of them. So, yeah, so that's I mean, that's roughly, that's the secularization thesis. In 1995, Jose Casanova wrote a book called Public Religions in the Modern World. Casanova is now emeritus at Georgetown in the US, but it was a major book in the field of the sociology of religion at the time, which showed that the assumptions of that thesis are simply incorrect. And at a more popular level, in 2001, on September the 11th, that event really shattered people's understanding, or people's belief that religion was simply petering out. So I think really nobody holds. There's one Scottish sociologist at the moment who holds this secularization thesis, but nearly everyone else, well, almost everyone else doesn't. That picture's gone. So what's shifting? What's the place of faith today? That's the critical thing. And I think this is the most central question for our ministry, because getting it right gives you a way into speaking meaningfully about faith today, or seeing the central thing. So my explanations of secularization simply in terms of decline, firstly, they don't account for the shifts in self-understanding that happened in this period. You know, we live in a very different world and think differently about ourselves and our faith, as I was saying a moment ago, so I want to spell out in a moment, than people in the 16th century or people in the 13th century or the 1st century. So there's a rich and new place for religion in our day. Or as Taylor puts it, the experience of belief has changed, or the conditions of belief have changed. You know, we still share the same faith of the early Christian community, and the faith that's been passed on from generation to generation, but we live it in a different way. See if I can spell that out, that difference for you, which has riches and big challenges, huge challenges as well, but significant riches as well. And one of the most insightful things about Taylor's big book, I'm going to show you the cover in a moment, is that one of the strongest drivers to this new place of faith today has been the church itself, from very early in the medieval era, right through to the present. Okay, so this is Taylor, Canadian philosopher, 94 this year, still writing, just published a big new book a year ago on the open, post-romantic, I won't go into the details here. But yeah, so a Catholic, born in Canada, French mother and English father, educated firstly at McGill in history and then at Oxford and taught mainly at Oxford and McGill throughout his teaching career, and published major books on Hegel, on the modern identity, sources of the self, or secular age is the big book that I want to think with you about. And then most recently, a philosophy of language and the language animal and cosmic connection. So it's Taylor's picture that I want to paint here. That's the cover. Okay. That's 800 pages. So this is the picture. This is a sort of a historical sweep, and it's sort of three major models that his picture shows us that there's been different ways of believing he starts from the 16th century to the present, but this medieval view that I want to paint here clearly goes right back before the 16th century. And I use this photo to sort of characterize it because, well, firstly, I love Chartres, most beautiful place. People have been to Chartres here, surely here. No, yeah. The gorgeous windows that tell the whole Christian story is part of it. It's just the most beautiful building. When I visited there in '96, so I spent the morning and well into the afternoon within the cathedral afterwards, and then had a cup of coffee in the afternoon. Was in a little coffee place down here, just in there. And what utterly overwhelms you at the time there is clearly the scale of the building. Like, if you can, in your imagination, wipe out the old city, the new city up the back there, what's been built since then, and imagine yourself living in that time, it's absolutely impossible to live outside of a believing environment. Possible for some people not to believe in God. I imagine not too many, but impossible to live outside of a believing environment. Materially here, that's obvious. But the whole of the society was structured in that way. It was a hierarchical medieval world. So this is, built there was a building there from the 8th century. But this was built between 1193 and 1250. So this is the medieval period from the 16th century and really right up to from the 16th century, and it shifted through the next 3 centuries. So not only materially in that the buildings dominated, but at every different level, society was permeated with explicit reference to the sacred in the very way that kings acted, and kings and lords, clearly the bishops anointed kings. So at that level, the faith was deeply connected with authority, various invocations of God inseparable from public life, and also all things making sense in terms of this hierarchical order of things. This is the medieval world, and clearly we're not there anymore. It shifted for several major reasons, and here are some of those. So the whole scientific revolution of the 17th century started people thinking differently about the cosmos itself, about the natural world. We've inherited that, the rise of modern science, medicine, all of those things that we take to be great gifts. The rise of democracy in the 18th century sort of knocked a central pivot out of the hierarchical worldview in which kings dominated, etc. If all people have a say in the development of government, then that's a different worldview. A new economic order that developed again during the 18th century, and took the role of the king and lords out of the economy itself. Fourthly, the rise of what these people call the public sphere, or what we call the media today. It was during this 18th century then that the whole practice of notice sheets, really, just simply printed notice sheets, arose that would reflect on the action of government from outside government itself. So here was a whole development that knocked the central pillars out of the medieval hierarchical worldview. But this was not the end at all to the place of faith. Faith developed, or religion had a new place in this culture. Taylor calls this place the age of mobilization, where faith was related to the social structure itself. You can still see this existing to some degree in the US today, where they see themselves as one people under God, where God is in the currency and in other different ways. It's sort of the remnants of that. Up until the 1960s, I think, Australians thought themselves as living in a Christian culture. But we no longer see that, at least that's not widely held anymore. But that's what underwent this whole age of mobilization. And it affects the way that we see the natural world as well, where God was still understood to be present in the natural world and in the society that we build that plainly follows God's design. So no higher meanings expressed in the universe as the Aristotelian hierarchical worldview sought, but still God is present. People like Locke, all these early scientists were Christians, and they saw God present in the design of the natural world. So not a medieval synthesis, but nonetheless God present in design. And society, then, God not present in the structure or the king, a medieval hierarchical world, but still in these early days, God's still present to the extent that we build a society that follows God's design. It's in this period then that denominations grow and religious adherence then becomes voluntary in that sense. So the development of a new sense of freedom. So here, it's fascinating that there's There's studies of religious practice in rural France in the late 19th century that show the highest percentage of church attendance for generations in that late 19th century. So this structure could still carry religious faith. So we've moved through two separate social structures here in which faith and the social structure were deeply intertwined. And that's the challenge we have today, or at least the lack of it. So this is Taylor's study of the post-1960s period, which he calls an expressivist age. And I put this picture before you because, well, I read in this area all the time, and this picture makes most sense to me. I don't think there's a better account of the place of faith today than this one. There's several that add to it. There's a group of scholars that work around Taylor, but I think this is the biggest, clearest picture. So Taylor argues that in the post-1960s, that in an expressivist culture, religion finds a new place, that we understand faith differently today. And this expressivist culture is this, that arose in the late 19th century, in the late 18th century, in what's called the Romantic movement, that was firstly a movement of philosophers and poets with a deep attachment to the natural world and this understanding of finding the truth within. That's the fundamental picture here. And so Taylor's argument is that this understanding arose at the late 18th century, spread through the 19th, exploded across the West in different ways, and things like the Bloomsbury Circle in London in the early 20th century, but in the 1960s exploded across the world. And this is his way of putting the key notion of, so this is him trying to name the experience of faith today, or what he calls the conditions of belief. He says that each of us has his or her own way of realizing our humanity, and that it's important to find and live out one's own as against surrendering to conformity with the model imposed from outside by religion or the previous generation or religious or political authority. Let's just stop on that for a moment. And the question is, does this nail the present? And if it does, what are its riches and what are its limitations? But, the riches and the limitations run beside or are a secondary consideration, if it nails it, that each of us has his or her own way of realizing our humanity. That there's a deep sense of authenticity in the modern world, and people are searching to be who they see themselves called to be. Now, clearly you might think, and I do think, some people are searching in crazy places. They may well be, that's true. But what are they doing? Are they searching? Does this personal search run through our culture? And that it's that it's important to find and live out one's own against, doing what somebody else has told us to. One of the examples I use here in teaching this, I teach a lot of teachers, and I talk about my experience of the journey to priesthood and tell people about my family background and the parish, particularly the parish in which I grew. But then this whole process through the seminary of personal appropriation and of thinking deeply about what God is calling me to be in this world. It's a pretty Ignatian pattern, and it does go back to the 16th century. I'll get even further back to Augustine. But Taylor's picture here is that since the 1960s, that this understanding has blown across our culture. So, Taylor's picture then is not only that people are searching and some people are searching in crazy places. He never says that, of course, but that religious believers are on the same path too, and the deeper source of our lives are in the love of God who moves toward us. So that's the picture. And so therefore, that religious life or the religious life or practice that I become part of must not only be my choice, but it must make sense to me. It must make sense in terms of my spiritual development as I understand this. The religious life or practice that I become part of. Yeah, so religious faith must be part of the journey, my authentic personal journey. And I set this cultural picture up at the beginning, just so as when we move into the council, I want to show you, at least from my perspective, how prescient I think the council was. Like it nailed a lot of things in the 1960s, culminating on the 7th of December 1965. But when you look down the track and the picture of the church-world relationship or the conditions of belief that it painted there, I think it's exactly where we are today. And it gives us some pointers, at least it shows us where the questions are. I was talking with a group of educational leaders last week and saying, look, I don't have any answers, I don't certainly all the answers, but I think I know where some of the questions are. And I think that's what the council has done for us.
James.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Go, no, let's do it.
First of all, thank you. Every time I listen to you, I think what a great teacher you are. So thank you. This is all of this, firstly, everything you described, I see little bits of it in myself. So I'm a kind of, a jigsaw of all of that carried within. But
right, find yourself in different periods.
Bits of each, identify myself still.
Yeah.
But setting that aside.
No, don't set it aside. That's great.
But the struggle, I get up every Sunday and I try to make some sense, and I look at the community and it's comprises people from several continents, different, and I'm thinking, it's very hard. You're talking to a community of young and old, all sorts of experiences, but also that range of cultural backgrounds. And I'm thinking, does this equally apply to every content of social experience, or?
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, so this is very much a Western picture, so the North Atlantic world, Australia, New Zealand, but every culture is being shaped by this deeply. In the experience of living in Australia, but even more broadly, you see these themes in other non-Western countries, if we just put it like that, in my limited experience of those countries, but you can certainly see it in the lives of people from those cultures here. So, but yes, it is a Western picture, but a picture that, well, through media and other forces as well, is shaping the world more strongly, I think. Yeah, so, Michael.
That's a wonderful presentation and a very healthy, approach. The thing I see as selling out that healthy, being true to the deep self and the inside is the phone. Like there's so many the educationists today saying that like kids, they sell their soul to satisfy an image, a way of being, that, and I'm not measuring up, and it's just selling out authenticity to the deep self. And that's a very huge dramatic shift. And they're so terrified about the psychic health and in integral identity of a young person who's sold and bows at the feet of this grand scene that I have to measure up to.
Yeah. So the phone and media is one huge distraction at the moment, but people can, yes, it's true. I was saying earlier, people look in all sorts of weird places and thinking that a phone or an image is going to find you, your deepest identity is limited. Let's just put it there. But they're looking, and the thing here is they are searching, and the challenge for us, I think, is if we can speak to that, if if we can help people to find the depth of what they're searching for there, then we have some chance of preaching the gospel. You know, they're not going to believe because, you know, Michael Brennan's, you know, set out an edict about the limitations of phones, or, you know, they're going to believe if we can join their search app, lead them through the limitations to, yeah, to the God who loves them.
James, is the search for authenticity, in a sense, that, as we see it, a form of subjectivism?
Well, yes, it is, but not in itself, you know. Yes, it can be lived like that, you know, and that's one of the huge traps in here. But yeah, so that's a trap.
Yeah.
But it's not entirely that, or, you know, like, I mean, my example of becoming a priest is like, we will only find the deepest truths of our lives outside of ourselves, you know. It ain't me, you know. So, but we will find it through, like Augustine's picture of the journey to faith is of the individual believer moving through his or her own knowledge and love, his knowledge and love, the center for him, through that. So through, we might say in the 21st century, through our own self-understanding. So it's a picture of internally transcending to the God who loves us. And I think that's the picture. So yes, subjectivism is a radical challenge, but it's not everyone, you know.
And I suppose that the depth of the moral source behind it becomes very important.
Crucial. That's why it's so crucial that we can engage in useful ways if we can lead people in the search. You know, so it takes, like, what Taylor's picture shows is that social structures in themselves no longer carry faith in themselves. You need good social structures, you need good institutions, we need good parishes, we need good schools, we need good dioceses, but in themselves, they don't carry faith. It's the way faith is expressed and communicated in those places that has the capacity to bring people to faith. So that's the challenge, I think, and I think that's what's incredibly useful about looking at the shifting culture and, you know, finding ways of connecting. And, you know, as Michael has said, and clearly, I mean, everyone sees, you know, people do search on places sometimes. We'll have to sometimes be there in the weeds with them, try and lead them through a bit. Yeah, and I mean, the person who I think has just stunningly spelt this out in the 21st century is Francis. He hasn't used these terms at all, but he's focused on the mercy of God and a church that goes to the margins. You know, it's that picture. So anyway, let's back here. I'm not going to talk for too long. So the shift in the pastoral constitution, I set that picture up firstly just for several reasons, but to show you how prescient the development of the pastoral constitution was, and the council itself. So prior to 2 slides, just to lead up to how did the Catholic Church find itself in this period of history? So let's just say from Innocent III in 1050, and so an important, incredibly profound church leader. The development of canon law before that, but had hugely widespread influence through the 11th century here. The church played an increasingly strong role in society from 1500, from 1050 onward. And the key understanding here, what most historians talk about, is the picture of Christendom, an attempt to foster a civilization where the institutions and culture were all supposed to reflect the Christian nature of society. So this was that picture that fitted into that medieval world and was enormously powerful. If you look at the practice of the legal system today, or the whole practice of hospitals, they're all a result of this picture and of the church's ministry in those periods. So no anachronistic picture here. There's no point in back then and condemning it. It was enormously rich. But what it did depend on was a strong alliance between the church and the state, as I've tried to point out already. John McManus is the most fantastic historian, an historian of church and society in 18th century France. That's the big book, two-volume thing, nearly 2,000 pages. And this is the picture that he paints there at every level, even in the 18th century, right then through to there, at every level in which the church and civil leadership, let's call it that, were intertwined. As he calls it, an almost symbiotic integration. So if laws were passed, for example, in what we would call the local council area, they'd be announced at Sunday Mass. If the whole economic system and the church's finances were all interlinked as well. But there were downsides to this picture. There's no totally perfect picture here. And the downsides to this, these are John McManus' words. He says, the fusion committed the church to patterns of action that today we'd see as the antithesis of the gospel. In his words, its mission of conversion becomes routine, its mysteries, social observances. So huge richness, deep challenges. So this is the medieval period. But from the end of the 18th century and into the 19th century, from about 1830 onward, the church rejected this whole modern social movement of democracy and freedom of the press, human rights, etc. The example that sticks out always, of course, is Pius IX. But from about 1830 onward, the whole of the church's leadership rejected that picture. And because it didn't give the church the capacity to influence the culture in the same structural way as it had previously. And so the church has struggled to proclaim the good news in this era. It meant that it lived in an adversarial relationship with the modern world, condemning the emerging liberal culture. So this is predominantly Pius IX. Well, not predominantly, but most especially Pius IX. Particularly freedom of conscience, freedom of the press, the separation of church and state. So right up until the eve of the council, that's the picture. Okay, and so that's where the council starts too. But there was no document on the church in the world at the beginning of the council. There was no thought of the question. But at the very end, in December, I don't know the date, in December 1962, Cardinal Sunens had a plan announced in his speech at the very last days of the council in 1962, said that he thought there were two major areas that the council was looking at. The church ad intra, the church's own self-reflection about itself. So it had already been debating a document called De Ecclesia on the church, which developed into Lumen Gentium over the next few years. So that the church in itself and the church ad extra, that the church's place in the world. He had rehearsed this speech with Pope John the 23rd in the March previous, and he was making it public at the council. And so it was from there that an idea of a document on the church's place in the modern world arose. So it took itself out of this previous picture, the 19th century picture, and started to think again in 1963. So here's a few drafts on the way. So at the beginning of the council, Pope John the 23rd set up the Theological Commission, and they drafted a whole range of documents for the council itself. None of those documents, as I've mentioned already, related to the church's place in the modern world, but a few of them had connected questions. So there was a document on, for example, the modern or the moral order, the Ordine Morale, the social order, on the community of the people, and on defending the pure doctrine of the faith. So those that had connections with an understanding of the church's place in modernity, but they were all negative questions. They all envisaged the world as an enemy against which the council must defend Christian life. For example, the last document there on defending the pure doctrine of the faith, condemned evolution, condemned polygenism, and condemned 19 other errors. So that's where the council started. No explicit raising of the question, but some assumptions about it. So clearly floating in people's minds at some degree, but no explicit reflection about it. These documents were then circulated to the bishops of the world, and many of them responded with negative responses, but none of those responses had any effect on the drafts that were submitted to the council itself. And none of those drafts were picked up as a draft at the council itself. So you get this picture of a 19th century perspective from 1958 to 62 that then started to shift. So there was a schema then that was drafted between February and May, and these are all very imaginatively titled Roman schema, surprisingly drafted in Rome. Between February and May, chapters 1 and 2 were on the vocation of the person in society, and chapters 3 to 5, marriage and the family, culture and the community of nations. So a picture of human existence in society, firstly, and then secondly, some particular questions. And we'll see that this sort of structure is what endured in the end. The structure endured. A different picture, but nonetheless the structure. But there were no paragraphs here condemning modernity. So here's a shift that's happened. But nonetheless, this picture of Christendom remained in Leo XIII's terms. Leo XIII distinguished between what he called the ideal situation and the pragmatic compromise, or what's called sometimes the thesis hypothesis picture. So the place that the church should be ruling the world along with kings and governors, and the place that we are, the hypothesis. So this endured then through, well, from Leo XIII, then right through to 1963. So this is the Roman schema. Sunans was not happy with this at all and wanted something better for the council. So he got some of the major voices of the council, Congar, Rana, Gerard Phillips, and a group of other theologians, invited them home, Malines. He was the Cardinal Archbishop of Malines in Belgium, invited them to think about these issues. And they came up with a draft that was never adopted. It was sort of, on the side in a sense. He didn't think it was, but it never ended up as a draft for the document in itself. But it came out of his frustration, but deeply influenced by Congar's understanding of the church in the world, and the church as a witness, as service, and as communion. So enormously rich and beautiful picture. Again, no condemnatory language about modernity. And at this stage too, this whole Christendom mentality is set aside. So the hankering after the 19th century or the 16th century was set aside from this period on. But nonetheless, the world was still seen as the external object of an action directed at its own transformation, a Christian sense, by which I mean these people saw the church outside of the world acting upon it. And there's a very real sense in which that is who we are. But the final document sees it in terms of the church, well, it's the church in the modern world, recognizing that we too are deeply shaped by this culture, as I've tried to spell out a moment ago. So the presupposition here, there's a deep gulf between church and society, and reducing the gap is the aim of Christian mission. So from December 63 to December 65 was then the most significant period in the development of this document. And two fundamental concepts emerged through this time. So it's here, it's in this time, and I'm summarizing all this here, but particularly in the final draft, in the final text, that these two fundamental understandings of the church's place in the world arise. The church in dialogue with the world and the church reading the signs of the times. I want to just spell out what that means and how, well, I think is how prescient, how insightful that is for our ministry and for the church in this present age. The Zurich Schema in 64 focused on two matters. The attitude toward the world of Christians, so a sincere and honest attitude, and forming alliances with others in organizations for the human good. So Christians and people of goodwill, much like, well, we've done it since this period of engaging with other organizations to foster the good of society and the world. But it's here so this is St. Paul's Cathedral. I hope you don't mind me putting up a Protestant cathedral, or at least an Anglican one. But again, the picture, I think it's a wonderful bridge. I love it. A wonderful church too, of course, but it gives you a sense of the church in modernity. So here's the final document structure. Again, as I told you, it's the longest document promulgated by a council in our tradition. It begins, divided into two parts, and the first part there is clearly the broad picture, or if you like, the theoretical understanding, the place of the church in the world today and humanity's vocation. And the second section then, part two, looks at some urgent problems. I clearly have no time to talk about any of those things: marriage and family, development of culture, really fascinating, the council's insight into culture there, socio-economic life, political community, and peace of nations. It's the first part that I want to look at briefly, just really focusing on chapter 4 and showing you how chapter 4 summarizes the whole of part 1 of the document in terms of the church in dialogue with the world and the church reading the signs of the times. This is in the introduction in number 3. It's a long introduction. Well, it's a long document. It's a long introduction. But here, from the very outset then, the document sets out its fundamental theme. There's a whole series of theologians and church leaders obviously involved in the drafting of this document. So it says the council, in witnessing and giving express to the faith of the whole of God's people brought together by Christ. So in 2 lines, as anyone in writing tries to do, summarizing the central reality that they're concerned about the faith of the people of God whom Christ has brought together, and the church then is witnessing to that. Cannot give more striking evidence of this people's feelings of oneness, concern, and love toward family, of which it's a part. So in the second 2 lines then, recognizing that we're in the world. We're here and we're part of this family. Then by entering into conversation with it on these various problems. So that's the fundamental metaphor that I see driving its way through the whole document, particularly through the first part 1. By contributing enlightenment derived by the gospel and supplying the human race with saving resources, which under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, the church receives from its founder. Okay, so contributing enlightenment derived, so bringing the gospel to bear, influenced by the Holy Spirit to help the salvation of the world. Oh, shit. Okay, so that, here's a paragraph summary, not even a paragraph, it's a few sentences, 1 sentence out of the introduction that sets the direction forward. It sees this dialogue with the world, or conversation with the world, from 4 different aspects. And the first is, and this is chapter 1, so chapter 4 simply picks up the main themes of chapters 1, 2, and 3, and structures its understanding of the church's relationship with the world there. So firstly, it's a dialogue with individuals, and that's the picture I was trying to paint a moment ago of people searching to make sense of their existence. And the church is entrusted with making manifest the mystery of God that discloses to us the meaning of existence. So the church's dialogue, engagement with each searching heart. Secondly, then, the church is engaged, and this is chapter 2 of the document, the church is engaged with the community itself, but in a different way than the Christendom mentality had in mind, because the church's mission is of a religious nature and produces a function, enlightenment, and resources which can be of service in constructing and strengthening the human community. So the church engaged in the questions of the day and attempting to influence public policy, influence the development, the direction of society and internationally in the light of the gospel. Number 2. And thirdly, that this dialogue is an internal dialogue that we're all engaged in, the dialogue of our lives, our place in the world, our own personal search, and the gospel itself. One of the ways in which this document puts that, and one that was very dear to Paul VI, was this quote here: the split between the faith they profess and the daily lives of many people is to be counted as among the more serious misconceptions of the day. So our own journey in faith to live, I mean, what does that say to us about authenticity? Living an authentic faith discovered in the love of God. And finally then, and I think this is what's really, I mean, the whole picture is extraordinary, but this is immensely powerful, saying that church world dialogue is two-way, that the believing community must keep itself open to the world. And this is, I think, this is the key quote. He says, the document says, it is for God's people as a whole, with the help of the Holy Spirit, especially you and I, pastors and theologians, to listen to the various voices of the day, discerning them and interpreting them, so that the revealed truth can be increasingly appropriated, better understood, and more suitably expressed, so that the revealed truth can be increasingly appropriated, better understood, and more suitably expressed. So that dialogical picture is really saying to us here that unless we are deeply open to the search of the people who we are engaged with, listening to their concerns and discerning with them about that, we would have no idea about what the gospel is calling them to. It's only in the listening, in the accompanying, that we can understand, that we can increasingly appropriate the theological tradition, the call of our God. So that's the dialogical picture that Gaudium et Spes develops. And another image that it uses, and it really is the same picture with different language, but focuses on a different theme, is examining the signs of the times, really shaped more by post-18th century understanding of history shaping human existence. And so it puts it in this is the strongest quote on examining the signs of the times. There are two others that arise during the document itself. To discharge this function, the function of continuing the mission of Christ, the Church has a duty in every age of examining the signs of the times and interpreting them in the light of the gospel. So that's a dialogical framework, isn't it? So that it can offer, in a manner appropriate to each generation, replies to the continual questions on the meaning of life, the life to come, and how they're related. There is a need then to be aware of and to understand the world in which we live, together with its expectations, its desires, and its frequently dramatic character. So in terms of the signs of the times, that we need to be receptive to the movement of history, be aware of it, think historically, understand what's shifting here. Because God acts in history through the Word incarnate, through the person of Jesus most clearly in our world, and through the Spirit's presence in the church and in society more generally, in the world. So history then is simply not a series of examples that correspond to an ideal world, but rather history for us is the place where God makes God's self present. Therefore, the church needs to be open to the action of God in history. That's the signs of the times. We're already over my 45, but just in one summary, here's Manu. So, in one way, trying to summarize, I think the fundamental insight of Taylor's is that social structures in themselves no longer carry faith in a post-1960s Western culture in themselves. Of course, structures matter, good functioning parishes, good functioning schools, good functioning dioceses matter profoundly, but it's the way that faith is articulated in those places that will make the difference. Yeah, two examples that you've probably got a million too. Last year, I was teaching this group in Melbourne, a group of teachers, and in order to do that, I always trying to set up the way that tradition works. I always ask people, who's been the most significant person in your journey of faith, and how would you describe that person's role in that journey? And you get a whole range of different things. It's really a most gorgeous, heartwarming, a diverse picture. Sometimes C.S. Lewis, somebody once said, a whole range of people. Often it's family, sometimes other people. This woman one day said, look, so she was a deputy principal. She said, look, it's the principal in my first school, just our new teacher. And I saw from the way he led the school and who he was, what Christian faith was about. She says, you see, I was born a Jew. And she then described the picture of journeying to conversion in a Christian, to Christian faith. So, a really profound shift. I mean, there's lots of other examples that I'm sure you encounter them all the time. But it's the personal expression of faith. I think two things are crucial here. Authenticity is clearly crucial, that people who express faith in an authentic fashion. But secondly, how to put it, an intelligent understanding of faith, a reflective, a theologically informed understanding of faith. People struggle and search in so many complex ways, and banal responses to searching questions don't cut it. They have to not only be authentic responses, but responses that understand the search of the people with whom we're engaged. So in a pastoral, in the post-1960s culture, the structure in itself doesn't carry faith, but individuals grow in faith when their personal search connects them with the gospel, with the tradition, with the church's community life. It's that dialogical connection is the perspective. So in our parishes and communities then, how can Christian faith be authentically expressed and lived so that the whole community, the broader community, might be drawn in to encounter the love of God? That is, how can parishes be a place of dialogue between faith and life? How can we make connections? Let's just have a break for a few minutes. I talked for about 50 minutes or something. But just have a break for a moment, and then we'll have a chance for responses, thoughts, your contribution. Right. But perhaps 5 minutes.
So you had a big night on Saturday night?
Yes.
You said the
Most of it, yeah.
couple of.
I just, yeah, that's the.
Wow. Just two of them.
From here.
So there are 4 families in mission. They've already got families in mission there. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. You got 2 priests up there already. Well, that'd be a bonus because that's the mission territory, sure.
I'll come back.
Oh,
I go at 9:30 or 10 o'clock.
good.
1:50 come back. Yes, the power walking. Yes.
All right, okay.
If that is
It's Saturday.
It's no morning office.
Ah. He's coming. Yeah. Right. Oh, what's his surname? Just so I said. Ryan. Okay. I haven't signed it yet, but hopefully it's in there. Not at all. I signed it already, have I? Yeah. Good. No, I see so many names. Good. Yeah, no, that's good. He didn't leave it till the last minute. Yeah.
Just go see.
I think this is really very good. How many times?
It's from Mexican.
That's where,
Of course, we gotta understand, of course, it's there. Running away from, not setting up which is separate from the world, but got to make sure we interpret that sometimes means judging too. That's the challenge, isn't it? That's the huge. Yeah. Yeah. That's another really good point. What's the government?
well, I think.
Yes.
Say 3 to 4.
Yeah.
That's why this is good, because the human heart.
Yes, but I think you'll find the richness.
Connection. Yeah. Well, I think there's a real.
You want me there? On the bed? This? Oh, you were there. And now we both came this side. It wasn't there, you know. It was that.
Yeah.
8 years.
Yeah. I've heard people say that as well. Yeah, the whole experience of life was so chaotic, devastating that they can't rationalise any goodness.
What are the Filipino guys doing is also cathedral.
Yeah.
Those all the area. You go to the area that it's
Got our best chance to evangelise.
Okay, what if we come back to the large group, and what if we think about this time as just a time of conversing across the group here? Clearly, I'm very happy to answer any questions or to respond, but yeah, what do you want to say to the larger group?
James, I know James, Charles Taylor talks about in his book about what he calls the buff itself, the development of the buff itself in modern society. So there's he imagines people walking around with this buffer around them, trying to protect them from themselves, from this whole influence of religion and culture and so forth. But I had never thought, because Charles Taylor, as Philip mentioned, that it was talking about this, speaking from a Western perspective.
Yes.
Whether this is the same in Asian cultures and particularly African cultures, and if so,
it's not. Yeah.
And so I'm interested to hear from
Yes.
if there's anyone with that background,
Yes.
whether that's the case, because
but
it changes the dimension of the.
Oh, it does, yes, but not simply in black and white, because the buff itself is not so much the influence of religion or those sorts of things, but the way in which we understand ourselves in time and in history and in the democratic worldview, we no longer, and I mean, I think this is pretty broad across the West, certainly in Australia, that we no longer see spirits and forces acting upon us without our intent. As in, like, this is the picture in the medieval world and before. It's the picture that the church worked against through the early part of the second millennium. So that's the picture of the buff itself, So he's not saying, so that decisions about faith or lack of faith need to be conscious decisions. That's the picture. So what is it? That's the buff itself. What's the other? I forget the exact word for the other self, but yes. And so in this world, his picture is, this is all the details of his theory, but that faith, the place of religion, transcendence, transcendence can be either spun open or spun closed. It's his picture. That there are people around who will want to tell us that this transcendence is, that the presence of God is a further thing. It's not part of our life at all. And there are people that assume that it's part of everyone's life. Well, we believe that the Spirit of God is part of everyone's life, but consciously that they are not there. Anyway, sorry. So that's the buff itself is not simply that we're shut off to religion. That's not the point. The buff itself is that we experience our own identity in a different way than the medieval world, particularly the early medieval world. Yeah. But yes, but the point you make about the place of religion in African cultures or other cultures, is different, and that their experience might be more prior to the buff itself picture. Yes, yeah. There you go.
I caught up with Bob Wilkinson on the weekend with some of the retired priests have a lunch at the Morford Arms on a Saturday, and Wilco's still reflecting, thinking, analysing the faith and formation. And of course, Wilco comes out of, as most of you would know, the Cardine approach, the see, judge and act. But he was saying, he put it in a different way, and I think it fits in with very much of what we're saying today. For the see, he said, we've got to start with reality, real life. Judge, a vision.
Yeah,
For us, that's our faith,
yeah,
our tradition. Then we've got to put it into action.
yeah.
And then when I think of that, the See Judge Act, or as he put it, the reality, the vision and the action, I think precisely of what you brought out today, to know the signs of the times, there's the reality,
Yeah.
and discern in the light of the gospel. There's the vision.
Yeah.
Put it into practice.
Yeah, nice, Steve.
So, but sometimes I think, and I'll say this, I don't know how many times over the years we keep hearing the signs of the times, and I think people forget to add the extra bit and interpret them in the light of the gospel.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably where the subjectivity can come in. We've got to get out of our subjectivity and let the vision of the gospel change our vision, change our perspective, and empower us into action.
Well, we want the gospel to be our vision, our subjective vision. You know, we want to transform every part of our lives, eh? You know, we don't want to shift off our self-understanding there and say, well, I'm living the gospel here, but myself is over there. You know, that I think that's the shift in modernity and the benefit of it. You know, there's real benefits there. Yeah, thanks, Dean. That's great. Please, yeah. Yeah, so
It's a kind of personal reflection, but that comes out of this lovely. You I think quoting Taylor himself saying, you know, the power of the authentic life.
Yeah.
And my experience is that people do respond when they sense or intuit authenticity, which I think often means encountering somebody whose life reflects what they're saying in terms of, you know, our faith. And I just find a nice reminder, you know, for us, because I do think there's kind of, you know, there are less of us and we're older and retired, and we get very entangled up in the performance of our duties, in compliance to the many things that are required of us, responsiveness to the, you know, the needs and the bit that can sometimes maybe potentially get lost of that is attention to our own authentic living of what we're doing, and which I think requires time and reflection and space, which we either don't have or don't find a way to give to it sometimes. So, but without that, I think it's right. Our words can, even good words, can fall a bit flat, ring a bit hollow, and I think then fail to be convincing.
Yeah. No, they're right. Yeah, I think. And an authentic life, it speaks deeply, like a life for us soaked in the gospel. It speaks deeply. Yeah, I'm sure you have lots of examples, no doubt. Last year, I celebrated a mass at one of our local colleges, and only it was a favour, you know. It was not the place I usually am at, but it was a big feast. I had whatever about all of that. So the RE leader, who's one of our students here, that was the favour basically. But I was so afterwards a bit of a cup of tea there, you know, for staff, people all standing around, and I just happened to land beside a woman who, in my first parish in 1981, was a high school student at the time, and from a really vibrant Catholic family, you know. And anyway, so we were chatting away, and she identified the RE leader who had invited me there, and whom I don't think she knew about my connection with her, and said, you know, she speaks of faith in such an authentic fashion. And I'd heard that from many other people in the school, students, and, you know, those sorts of lives lived, you know, a mature, authentic faith is immensely powerful. And yeah, I think that's what our age puts at the centre, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
So just to go and shut up.
Okay.
There must be many ways to come to that.
Yes.
But for us, you know, one path that's often taken, but maybe not by everybody, would be times of, you know, deep attention to the presence of God in our heart, in others, in the world, you know, a sense of not ourselves at the centre, but
yes,
flooded by something larger. and the story that we carry, which is in Scripture, and the long story of our tradition and theology and so on. But I also think it's possible, not by lack of goodwill, but by the demands of life, that, prayer, reflection on Scripture, attention to our long tradition, which seem to me could have a place at the heart of our priestly ministry, might sometimes, even often, be the things that are soonest left off, because of other demands.
Yeah, I know. It's hard. We're hardworking, very busy people. Yeah, no, but yeah.
It seems to be that Thomas Merton was a great force, 40 years ago, 50. 50. Personally, I think it was he that I read a pamphlet in the cathedral when I was an apprentice electrical fitter.
Right.
That was
Yeah.
stuff.
Hmm.
And I thought,
It's beautiful.
this is
Yeah.
me. And that drew me into priesthood. And I think the way you've expressed all this has been faithful to that quiet, reverential voice that the mystics deeply honour, and the sacredness of that. And so anything, that's why I mentioned this social media stuff that so many people talk about, abandoning that sacred area instead of,
You're well practiced, Michael. You've done it too many times already.
I see young girls down the beach,
Yeah.
walking along. I'm
Yeah.
reading the book.
Yeah.
Beautiful bodies,
Yes.
but I've got to measure up, and it's a real sellout to
Yeah. So that is one of the challenges of our day. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's why I mentioned that
Those solutions.
that other stuff earlier that
Yeah. No, I got it. Yeah.
it's so dominant. There was a
Yeah.
phenomenal article
Yeah.
about a month ago in Weekend Australian, and
Yeah.
very good detail on.
Yeah. Yeah. So we need to find ways through that. Well, sounds like we're done. Yep. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for that. That's great.
Thank you.
We look forward to next month, where Michael Trainer has probably gone to revise his presentation after. So Michael Trainer next month, let me think, it's a Wednesday, and I believe it's the 22nd or the 23rd of October. So it'll be the same time, and his focus will be on the Constitution de Verbum, which was on the Word of God. So we're looking forward to that, and probably a year later, we'll look at the other two constitutions, one on sacred liturgy and the other one on the church, that James mentioned earlier. So thank you very much. I'll send out a follow-up email soon for a number of people who are online, and for everyone really to be able to access the link to the recording of this, which reminds me, we probably need to stop that there. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers.
Back getting these notes.
The whole record, you have to have James if he wants to. Everything you can see. Yeah. Everyone's gonna get the link.
There's some people that have to come.